People like games.
What up, people? It's Solo, and welcome to the SimCity 2000 speedrun.
That's fucking outstanding.
The game actually ended up having a little bit less info than I'd expected in terms of how it was developed. However, there was a little bit on the original SimCity and some of the improvements they made for this game. And the creator, whose name is Will Wright, is someone who's super interesting and very fundamentally innovative, important to the industry. So, without doing much further, Will Wright, who I was just mentioning, is central to the story because his first game, which was called The Raid on Bungling Bay, it was sort of like a military top-down shooter with a helicopter, actually ended up getting published by a company called Broderbund, which, if you remember from last week, was responsible for Carmen Sandiego and Prince of Persia. So, funny enough, they're responsible for Will Wright's first game, and they'll come back into the story as well. However, after publishing the game, Will found that he actually ended up liking designing the city aspect and those different elements more than he did the actual combat systems. So with the success of the game in terms of moving over to Japan and some sort of licensing agreement, he had some money and he's like, I'll make a game that maybe not everyone will love that's based around that sort of city planning aspect. And thus he made SimCity. He couldn't get anybody on board. This is the original one, and this is 1989. And so he's like, you know what, fuck it. We're just going to launch it ourselves, and made a publisher called Maxis. Still needed a distributor, so that's where Broderbund came back in. They're like, yo, we like this game, but you have to add time challenges in, because all publishers passed because they thought the game, which didn't have a win or lose element, wasn't going to be sort of interesting to buyers. And so with the time challenges, they're like, all right, it's good. So, thus, SimCity was released, and it is obviously one of the greatest games of all time, originally called Micropolis. That ended up then moving forward and again evolving when it came down to SimCity 2000. The biggest differences being that they created a new point of view. So, in all the previous games, it was top down. Now it was isometric, which means you could sort of pan over everything from an angle and see the whole map. So, therefore, you could do more sophisticated building. And so they allowed educational facilities and a few more sophisticated city planning options involved in there as well. Obviously, they would go on to just make a whole bunch of different versions of the game over and over time, but this was the last one led by Will Wright, who would actually just leave and go on to make a game that we actually made a story mode episode about called Spore. One of the most important people in gaming that just sort of not really celebrated properly, so it was worth talking about him. And the game, actually based on Will Wright's own words, was to create an open-ended interactive experience that put the power in the player's hands and left it up to them to have fun. A phrase and concept that it would evolve into gaming, into the idea of what a sandbox is. And so if you know gaming and people say it's a gaming sandbox, you could thank Will Wright. But I'm way over, so peace.